Well, my father was looking somewhere for a place to hide. He could see it, time is coming, and especially with the concentration camp, he knew I will not be able to survive and so forth. So he was looking always for somewhere to hide. And it happened like that. I'll tell you in hindsight now, which I didn't know at the time, but I know now. There was a Jewish family called Kessler who lived in a village called Rostochki. And in 1942, as they were organizing the labor camps, and they didn't work and they didn't want to go to the ghetto to street, so they ran away to their village. Well, not to the village, but to the forest near the village. And they were hoping that the villagers, or a couple of the villagers, will provide them with provisions. They had a little bit of money and so forth. It was very sort of, at first they didn't know what they were doing. They were discovered a couple of times, but they were decent guys. They let them live. In the meantime, they ran away. They were afraid they'll come back. Anyway, to cut a long story short, in a few months they learned that there has to be a proper hiding place and not just living like that, which they built a very good bunker underground in a very deep forest, young forest, thick, that if you stood 5 feet away from me, you couldn't see me. It was so thick, dense. Young trees, overgrown, and so forth. And unless you laid on the ground, you couldn't see the feet, sort of thing. That's the only time you could see somebody. And they built a bunker there. There were 6 of them. There were 4 members of the Kessler family, and their niece and her husband. And by April, May 1943, they were running out of money. They were giving money a certain guy called Petro Ильницкий. I'll spell it P-E-T-R-O, Petro, which is the first name, Ильницкий, I-L-N-I-C-K-I, surname, Ильницкий, right? And they had an agreement that they will buy provisions, which was rye, or corn as you call, from him, and salt and etc., and they will buy the provision from him. They were running out of money. So they spoke to Petro to go into town and find some other Jewish family who have money, who would be willing, because he will bring them into the cave, to pay for the provisions for the 6 others, and they'll have a hiding place. And Petro came into town and met up with a gentleman called Lev, L-E-W, Mr. Lev. And they made arrangements with him. He said he had money, and there were 3 of them. There was Mr. Lev, Mrs. Lev, and their daughter, and they will provide the money to buy the provisions. And the arrangement was that on a Wednesday, Ильницкий will come and get them. But unfortunately, on Tuesday, Mr. Lev was killed.
By whom?
By the Germans. So Mrs. Lev and her daughter were left. When he came to pick them up, he heard the story, so he took them with him. When he got back to the village and then to the cave, he took Mrs. Lev and her daughter. He found out they have no money. So he had to start the whole business all over again. He was coming into town to look for somebody else, and I think Kessler told him, I have such an idea that Kessler told him to try and get in touch with Gryunschlag. He knows that he was a well-to-do man, and etc., if he would be willing. And that's how it was. Petro came into town and made arrangements with my father. And made arrangements with my father, and then on the 8th or the 10th of August 1943, he arrived. We made the arrangement that we will try and get out to the outskirts, to a mill on the outskirts of the town, that we will hide there, and after dark we will go with him to the village. And so it happened. He came and we went with him to the village. We stayed in his house for a few days, and then we were transferred to the cave in the forest. And by then the population in that cave swelled to 11 people, which was built for 6. Petro Ильницкий was a very religious man. Also, the rumors were, I heard, afterwards, after liberation, that he and his 2 brothers were feared by the whole village. They were very good fighters, and etc. But he was a very religious man, and somehow or other he decided, to help the cashless. Not that he was helping them, he certainly could not give them the food for nothing, because the majority of the villagers were poor and they could not afford it. So the money that he was given and paid, he deserved it, and B, he could not have afforded it to do otherwise. Of course, he charged a bit more to what he paid, but so he should too, because he was making life for his family a little bit easier. He certainly didn't have too much. In the villages there, the ordinary peasants in the villages, they used to have baked bread only on holidays, because it used up too much flour. I'm just trying to describe you the conditions of living conditions where they were there, right? And he turned out a very decent and honest guy. So much so that it is really surprising. At first we thought he's doing it for money and so forth, but we learned otherwise. We learned otherwise because, there were a couple of incidents which, I will tell you if you want me to.
Would you share them with us?
Very funny, yes, I'll share them with you. Well, the first incident, you see, when my father accepted to go to Ильницкий, he only heard about the cave that the castle was built. But apparently there were also 2 other caves in the same forest, in the distance, not far away. And then there was a population of something like 50 Jews in the 3 caves. And that was considered a very weak population, and the traffic may be big and so forth. And father said afterwards, had he known that, he wouldn't have accepted. He wouldn't have gone. Anyway, to cut a long story short, we were in the cave sometime in October 43. They discovered one of the other caves. What I mean they discovered, the peasants were in the forest, to the best of my recollection. They had a water supply, that there was like a stream coming down the mountain, and they were going to get the water from the cave. From their cave to the water was about a distance of about 50 yards. And apparently the peasants went hunting. There were boars there, wild pigs in the forest. And they wounded the wild pig, and the wild pig ran to the water. When they followed the pig to the water, they followed a track. They saw a track from the water, and they followed the track, and they finished up in the cave, where there were 18 Jews, if I remember correctly, or 28, something like that. Anyway, they bribed them and they left them there, and 5 of them ran away. And the 5 ran away and came to us, and the population swelled to 18 in a cave that was built for 6. Right? And within 48 hours, they brought others, and all the others were exterminated.
By whom?
By the local population. Yeah? By the peasants. So, here it is. There was some bad blood created between Klesser and my father was said to Ильницкий that it is impossible now, he can't stay there anyway. Ильницкий took us back to his place in the village, and we were going to stay in his hayloft.